Ladies and gentlemen and colleagues, welcome to this session. And in this session, actually, the title of the panel was slightly modified to ensure the coherence within the program. The original title was the Interpolar Conference, a knowledge platform between Arctic and the Third Pole. And this session is organized by UArctic Chair in Arctic Legal Research and Education in collaboration with Northern Institute for Environmental and Minority Law at the Arctic Center of the University of Lapland. So the change of the title was because, the title that I mentioned, the original title, it was because we wanted to promote interpolar knowledge exchange based on the platform we created 2 years ago in connection with the conference that we organized. The title of the conference was Interpolar Conference, Connecting the Arctic with the Third Pole. So the conference was organized jointly by the Arctic Center of the University of Lapland in collaboration with International Center for Integrated Mountain Development, ICIMOD, and the conference was hosted by ICIMOD in its premises in September 2023. The aim of the conference was to build the network of scholars, especially the young scholars and stakeholders from both regions, from Arctic and from the Third Pole, to discuss the commonalities and also differences between the two regions, to study the two regions together through the comparative lens, and to develop a sustainable scholarly community for sharing knowledge and mutual understanding via interdisciplinary exercises. And the relevance of studying Arctic and Third Pole, Hindu Kush Himalayan region together can be rationalized by 4 points in my view, but there might be many. So first is cryosphere, second people, third transboundary connections calling for shared governance framework, and then fourth is two-way interactions between the two regions. So about cryosphere, the studying cryosphere behavior is the actually primary contact point or primary connecting point between Arctic and the Himalayan region. Cryosphere's role in regulating global climate system is crucial to promote, polar science, as we know, and an increase in temperature in both regions, as we know, which is disproportionate to 3 to 4 times faster than the global average. That also makes a connection. And then thawing of the cryosphere in both regions is dramatic, as we have been hearing during last 2 days, and eventually having an effect on the environment, ecosystem, biodiversity, and society with local and global consequences, as we see in both regions. And about people, as I was also speaking in the earlier session, saying that, when we talk about three polar regions, Arctic, Antarctic, and Third Pole, if we call it Third Pole, Hindu Kush Himalayan region. So there is a connecting point between Arctic and Third Pole, unlike Antarctic, is people. So in both Arctic and the Third Pole, we have people, and these people include big numbers of indigenous peoples in both regions. So that brings a connection here. And as I said, that indigenous people or here in this region, they are often called tribal people. They bring evidence-based knowledge, often known as traditional knowledge. And that knowledge is utilized or used in environmental governance because they know the first-hand knowledge of environmental conservation, biodiversity conservation, forest preservation. So that knowledge is important. And then these people are living transnationally, sometimes across borders. So they have this across-border relationship as well, both in the Arctic and also in Third Pole Himalayan region. About transboundary connections calling for shared governance framework, let me talk about Arctic. It is centered around the Arctic Ocean. The Arctic contains the landmass of 8 circumpolar countries with territories within and beyond national jurisdiction. While the Third Pole Hindu Kush Himalayan region has no areas beyond national jurisdiction like the Arctic, that Hindu Kush Himalayan region shares issues of common concern, such as water resources and transboundary water sharing, and other issues related to transboundary relationship. As a result, transboundary nature of issues prevailing in both regions, Arctic and the Third Pole, calls for a shared governance framework grounded in science diplomacy and the integration of various knowledge systems, including local and evidence-based indigenous knowledge. Indeed, the impact of climate change in both regions will furthermore lead to global consequences beyond the regions. For example, sea level rise. Melting of Icelandic, Greenlandic glaciers will contribute to sea level rise, and other socio-economic and political implications. Even though in the Third Pole region we say that around quarter of the people, humanity will be affected because of lack of water resources, but it has also consequences because melting water comes to the ocean at the end. And the fourth point, the two-way interactions between the regions. First of all, the awakening of albedo effect due to the thawing of cryosphere in both regions accelerate global warming, and with interconnected and across regional effect. For example, thawing of the ocean cryosphere, such as in the Arctic, and melting of glaciers and ice sheets released into the ocean, such as from the Third Pole, disrupt ocean currents, destabilizing the planet's heat distribution. And the alteration of ocean currents contributes to changes in atmospheric circulation patterns affecting weather patterns and local and global climate shifts. So there you see the interactions between not only between the two poles but also in the planetary context. The changes in the atmospheric air circulation from the Arctic significantly impact South Asian monsoon, and we have been hearing that South Asian monsoon also affect the changes in South Asian monsoon also affect the Arctic and globally. So building on the success of the first interpolar conference that we organized in 2023, we are now planning the second edition of this conference. And again, this second edition will be held in September this year in ICIMOD. And this time the conference will contribute to the objectives of the International Year of Glaciers Preservation, which aims to take immediate action to preserve the cryosphere and build resilient future for all of us. So I invite you to all, if you have chance to join us in Kathmandu, you can join us. We have the flyers. I can circulate these flyers. So we have still the deadline, which is extended until 15th of May. So if you want to participate in the conference, please feel free to submit your abstracts. So this panel is dedicated to the promoting of the second edition of the Interpolar Conference, and most of the panelists here were participants in the first Interpolar Conference, not all, but I mean most. Therefore, we will hear their insights concerning the content of that I'm going to talk about, what they will be speaking on. So that would lead us to develop the understanding what we want to share with you all. So our first speaker will be Kannagavali Suryanarayan. She is a PhD candidate at the UIT, Arctic University of Norway, and she will offer insight into the rethinking of knowledge exchange in a multipolar world. So before I give you floor, let me actually, because we are running out of time, let me introduce all the speakers. Then I think one after another, you just give your interventions, and then we will go questions and answer. So second speaker will be Dr. Monish Tiwari from National Center for Polar and Ocean Research, and he will talk about the Arctic changes and its contribution to the South Asian monsoon and vice versa. Third, we'll have Dr. Santosh Ravnar from Ocean Policy Research Institute, Sasakawa Peace Foundation, who will offer insights into climate security in the Arctic and the Third Pole. And fourth speaker will be Mohammad Farooq Azam from ICIMOD, who will speak about status and challenges in glaciers, cryosphere monitoring in the Hindu Kush Himalayan region. And last but not the least, we have Raushan Tara Jaswal, who is the assistant professor of Jindal Global Law School, and she will talk about Third Pole approaches to global governance in the context of Arctic and Third Pole Hindu Kush Himalayan region. So I give the floor to Kannagavali.
Yeah, namaste and good evening to everybody. It's truly an honor to be here and in the land that's been home to ancient wisdom, especially spiritual wisdom, that is deeply rooted in the rhythms of nature. My talk would be delving on issues of knowledge that we didn't discuss today, the civilizational knowledge and wisdom that India has been home to. As we gather to discuss knowledge exchange between the Arctic and Himalayas, I'd like to begin by reciting a couple of lines from Kumarasambhava, which is written by Kalidasa in 2000 years ago. Astyuttarasyam disi devatatma Himalayo nama nagadirajaha Purva paroto yanidhi vihagya stita prithvya iva manadandaha. From this, you would understand the word Himalaya is already there. So the verse is about Himalayas. It's a 2,000-year-old scripture. So it speaks about how Himalayas is in the northern part of the country. And here he uses the word Devatatma. Devatatma means, Atma is soul, Deva means God. So Devatatma is the soul of God. He says that Himalayas is the soul of God. It's a sacred geography. And he also goes on to say Nagadi Raja. Nagadi Raja means king of mountains. It's such a massive mountain. It is lays on the northern side of India. And it is interconnecting between two ocean bodies to the eastern side, the Arabian Ocean and the Bay of Bengal. And how does it look? It looks like Prithvi. It looks like Manadandaha. He uses the word Prithvi and Manadandaha. He says it's like the measuring stick of the world. It's so long, it looks like the measuring stick of the world. So this kind of knowledge has existed, and we knew where Himalayas was and how it looked. And this kind of knowledge existed in India. And also in Indian subcontinent, we pray to the rivers. Gange cha Yamune cha Godavari, Saraswati, Narmade, Sindhu, Kaveri, Jalesmin, Sani. On a daily basis, people recite these prayers. These areas are considered as divine beings and sacred spaces and living symbols of our spiritual heritage. Prayers are recited, as I said. And going back to Isha Upanishad, which dates back 5,000 years, reminds us of the entire universe and creatures belong to the divine. No being is superior to the other. This is an ecocentric approach, radically different from the human-centered perspective dominant in some other parts of the world. The spiritual relationship with nature becomes especially important when we talk about climate change. While it's true that we must collaborate globally, we must also acknowledge that the crisis we face today was largely triggered by industrialization and modernization projects. And yet today, the global north, the institutions in the global north and knowledge structures that cause these damage now propose to offer solutions without looking at alternate worldviews and knowledge from the rest of the world. So when we compare the Arctic and the Himalayas, I see two key similarities. First, both these regions are deep spiritual and cultural reverence to nature. Just as indigenous people of the Arctic see the land as sacred, the people of Indian subcontinent live in close communities with rivers, peaks, and forests. Himalayas are not just tourist destinations, they are spaces of worship and meditation, where civilization itself has grown around sacred geography. Secondly, both have been subjected to colonial histories, settler colonialism in the Arctic and extractive colonialism in Himalayas. Colonization not only destroyed people and ecosystem, it fractured knowledge systems. While traditional knowledge has survived in both regions, the ability to protect and preserve these systems varied due to population, diversity, and various socio-political factors. These realities must be central when we talk about knowledge exchange. We cannot assume that science is a neutral term. Science production, often centered in global north, is deeply entangled with power structures, funding asymmetries, and gatekeeping through academic journals and institutions. The global south has largely remained at the periphery of knowledge infrastructure. This brings us to the need for epistemic decolonization, a serious effort to recognize and validate non-Western pluralistic worldviews. Coloniality has tried to erase the alternate narratives, privileging one kind of rational knowledge as universal while marginalizing all others. Now, as we transition from unipolar world to a multipolar world order, the rising influence of the global South voice, we need to have an opportunity to reshape the governance knowledge flows. We must move beyond the linear diffusionist model where knowledge is simply transferred from the bright zone of the north to the outside the bright zone. This model treats Western science as the only valid knowledge and positions global South as a passive recipient. Instead, we should build platforms that encourage two-way knowledge exchange built on pluriversality, the idea that multiple coexisting worldviews can contribute to knowledge and governance. This means de-imperializing, decolonizing, and de-hierarchizing how knowledge is produced, validated, and applied. Some have proposed in the past legal transplant models, taking Arctic governance frameworks and applying them in the Himalayas. But this overlooks a key issue: power dynamics between both these regions. Without addressing colonial legacies, geostrategic challenges, and sovereignty concerns, these models risk becoming tools of epistemic domination rather than genuine cooperation. Himalayas are not just research sites, they are living, breathing civilization. From Gangotri to Panchaprayag, sacred spaces have long guided how communities relate to rivers and mountains. Any attempt to protect the region must include cultural values, local community, and spiritual worldviews, not just satellite data and policy prescriptions. We must also rethink the architecture of the knowledge institution. If we want to create a Himalayan Council similar to the Arctic Council, we must ensure that it is rooted in the ontology of the region, not merely copying Western structures. Working groups should be led by local stakeholders, and traditional knowledge holders should not be subsumed or diluted into the Western science. It must be respected as equal. So despite centuries of colonization, Himalaya still holds vast reservoirs of civilizational knowledge across language, religions, and philosophies. Unlike the Arctic, where traditional knowledge is often preserved by smaller indigenous groups, the Himalayas is home to rich plurality of traditions. These must be recognized, preserved, and integrated into modern environmental governance. To conclude, I would say, the goal is not to reject the modern science or to resist collaboration. It is to ensure that our exchanges are equitable, inclusive, and spiritually conscious. We need to move from one world, one truth to many worlds, many truths. Only then we can confront the global challenge with full depth of human wisdom. So let's remember the ancient Vedic ideal of Vasudhaiva Kudumbakam. The world is one family. True knowledge exchange happens when we listen as we teach and we embrace pluriversality as a guiding principle. Thank you very much.
Okay, good evening everyone, and thank you Professor Kamrul for inviting me to this panel. Professor Kamrul asked me to speak on how Arctic is related to Himalaya from a scientist perspective. But when I think about this topic, then I find that we talk about the glaciers on Himalaya, etc. But from where those glaciers get their mass, from where they get the snow? They get the snow through monsoon precipitation mostly. In Western Himalaya, there is some precipitation via western disturbances as well. But mostly they get their, the glaciers get their mass from the monsoon precipitation. So monsoon is a connecting link between Arctic and Himalayas. So yesterday I had shown several slides where I had shown that how the Arctic is controlling monsoon. And so I'm not going to show any slides today, but I will put forward my viewpoint in 4 points. So the first point, as I said yesterday, that we talk about Arctic and Himalaya and Antarctica, but if you look from a fish's viewpoint, then there is only one ocean and they can travel from one part of the other part of the ocean without any hindrance. From them, it is only one planet. So it should be like for us also. And as I showed yesterday, that those parts of the earth are connected by various atmospheric and oceanic circulations. And basically those atmospheric and oceanic circulations are driven by energy difference. The equators and tropics receives more energy from the sun, polar regions receive less. So this energy, this temperature gradient causes this atmospheric as oceanic circulations, and which there are various internal dynamics which finally leads to climate anomalies which get transferred all over the globe. So second point is that when we know that it is one planet, the various parts of planets are interconnected via various oceanic and atmospheric pathways, then our studies have shown that Arctic influences monsoon. We had a whole session yesterday in which we had given hard evidences. There are observational evidences via satellite data, etc. There are model numerical simulation physics models which have shown that there exist links which show that how Arctic is controlling monsoon. And we have past climate data also when CO2 level was as high as today. At that time also we see that how Arctic sea ice extent and monsoon are related. And all those studies shows that in a global warming scenario, when sea ice extent is less, at that time monsoon is stronger, more precipitation is there. But this precipitation is spatially variable and there are chances of more extreme events. So there will be more of rainfall, some places there will be less of rainfall, and that would cause floods and droughts. So that is the second point, that Arctic and monsoon are interconnected. But there is third point is that it is vice versa, that is other way around also. As I said, everything is interconnected. So if Arctic climate is affecting monsoon, the monsoon is also affecting Arctic climate. Now when precipitation takes place, large amount of latent heat of condensation is released. So when steams form, when you boil water, steams form. Steam is much more, if you get burned by the steam, it is much more hotter than the water because of it has latent heat. That is known as latent heat of vaporization. And when that vapor condenses and form precipitation, it releases that heat in the atmosphere. That heat is transferred to the Arctic within few weeks. So whenever there are extreme events of precipitation happening over Indian subcontinent, at that time that heat is transferred to Arctic, it causes more ice melt there, which again influences the Indian monsoon. So it is a two-way street. And the final point regarding Himalaya is that, as I said, that more extreme events are taking place. So these more events are even more threatening in Himalaya because of the topography, because of the mountainous slopes that results in landslides. We have been hearing about flash floods, etc., cloudburst. So all those are effects of these extreme events, and they causes landslides, glacier melting, GLOF, etc. So that is how Arctic is affecting Himalaya from a scientist perspective. Thank you. Thank you very much.
Good evening, everyone, once again. I'll not take too much of time because it's almost end of the day. I'm supposed to talk about climate security, which is a bit a complex topic again, but I'll just brief it out what climate security means in Hindu Kush region or in this part of the world. Climate security is a complex branch. It includes food security, water security, health security, human rights security, and so many other things, including climate financing and other stuff. So how climate security can be put into policy dialogues, and more importantly, in United Nations framework of Climate Convention, UNFCCC, where climate financing for this security, the climate resources for this security has to be disseminated. So that's very important. Well, I am a part of UNFCCC IPCC reporting, scientific reporting, working group 2, 1 and 2. And I do participate every year in UNFCCC COP, Climate Conference of Parties. And it's very sad to say, not much of dialogues and discussions and, some kind of, initiation is not there in terms of climate security in Hindu Kush region. And there are multitudes of factors. One of the factor is we have no parameters to measure and put into the context how this climate financing or lost and damaged fund or climate-induced migration loss could be measured and somehow calculated in numbers, because we are talking about finance, and put into the dialogues and these reports of IPCC. There's not done this. Scientific community does. Working group report 1, AR6, as you say, the latest report, AR6, working group report 1, has a lot of scientific evidences. And we also heard from Professor Kulkarni. I was really, really impressed with all those scientific evidences. And what are the impacts of those findings, of those phenomena, I would rather say, impact measurement is also very important. And once we do the impact measurement, that will give us some kind of numeric values, if we can put in, approximate, and then we can communicate that to the policymakers or who are involved, the stakeholder who are involved in this discussions and dialogue at UNFCCC. So that would be very important, how we can measure this impact mechanism for establishing the measurement and somehow bringing out the approximation for this international community and stakeholders. Along with that, a very important thing is spiritual things are attached here with climate security as well. I don't know how we can put it. We can call it spiritual security. I don't know. Maybe we can call it. I don't know. But terminology might be different. I don't want to controversy, but so many things are there which is different than the other part of the world, where we're talking about the Arctic or we are talking about Andes region. They have their own different traditional practices and community, and then biodiversity and many other things in terms of climate and climate security. So those distinctions and those consideration of those factors are also very important, which makes things a little bit complicated, but at least we have to start somewhere and then try to put into perspective to facilitate climate security and get the resources required for those securities. Thank you.
Good evening, and thank you, Kamrul, for inviting me here. So we are talking a lot about glaciers, but in this region HKH, the two components of cryosphere, snow and permafrost, they're also very important. So I will be very brief. So I will give you some numbers. For instance, in the HKH region, we have 54,000 glaciers, and so far we have observed only 38 glaciers, which is not even 1% of the total area. Most of these glaciers which we have observed have been stopped after a couple of decades. Most of these glaciers are very small, which are kind of like very rapid response type glaciers. So the large glaciers are not observed, probably not enough to represent the overall area, because we are having a lot of volume logged in the large glaciers. Snow, that is another big component of cryosphere in the Himalayan region, and that is actually having around 1.5 million square kilometer of area seasonally. And this snow is also depleting like anything. This year, the snow is lowest over last 23 years by reduction of almost 23% from the normal average value. So that is also affecting the downstream communities by changing the runoff seasonality and volume. Then the third important component is the permafrost. So that is not touched, I think, enough in this gathering since yesterday. Permafrost is a component that is very important for the Arctic region, and a lot of studies have been done in that area. But it's a very new area of research in the Himalayan region. The first order assessment suggests that we may have up to 16 times of the glaciers, we may have up to that much area logged in permafrost. So that means the huge amount of water is logged in permafrost. So like snow and glaciers, which are visible with eyes, affected by climate change, permafrost is also affected by climate change. We can also understand over the recent decade, we had lots of hazards. Recent hazard of which happened in Sikkim, that was linked with permafrost thawing, along with glacier retreat and expansion of lake. Similarly, the other hazard we had in India, Chamoli disaster, was also linked with the permafrost thawing. So we need to give more attention and more focus on these other two cryospheric components. So now I would like to touch a bit upon the challenges we have. Like somebody is going in the Arctic region, so they have to face the low temperatures, but in general they have lots of facility to combat with that low temperature up to minus 40. In the Himalayan region, we don't have that low temperature. We are working around minus 5, minus 10 normally, but we have low oxygen. Normally, a glaciologist in the Himalayan region is working between 4,000 and 5,000, 6,000 meter band. And around this band, we have around 50% of oxygen. So that makes research monitoring really challenging in this region. Furthermore, we have very limited capacity in this region. So we don't have trained manpower. We don't have courses to train our students, youngsters on glaciology. And that is leading to data scarcity in this region. So when we are having global models, so this region is not able to feed enough data to those global models. Furthermore, we are lacking in this region the integrated monitoring. What does it mean? When we are going in a catchment, normally we have two visible cryospheric components, glacier and snow. Third one, permafrost is still existing there in many catchments. So when people are going there, they are observing one of these components. If somebody is interested in permafrost, they observe the permafrost. Similarly, glacier and snow. We need to integrate this monitoring now, because not one component will not suffice the requirement of understanding the downstream runoff changes. Then there is huge gender imbalance. So like if you talk about glaciology, so we don't find female glaciologists. It's very difficult to bring, like in my own session just before, it was very difficult because we have just one in this region who is really working on ground. So in Delhi, I invited her, so she was so kind to join here. But in general, there is a huge imbalance. Like we cannot even say like 95% or 5%. Then we have transboundary rivers. So there are water issues, water sharing issues. I don't want to touch this topic because it's a bit sensitive at the moment. Another issue is about the data sharing. Because of the geopolitics in this region, we are not able to share the data. I am sure all the scientists working in this region, they are working for science. They want to develop future projections with better confidence, and they want to share the data. But the geopolitics in this region doesn't allow that. So that is another big challenge here. Then we have some climate-induced challenges. For instance, we understand the frequency of extremes is increasing, as Dr. Manish highlighted. And it is affecting the overall cryosphere. And together with the very fragile geography and geology of the region, we are having more and more disasters. So that needs to understand. Of course, every disaster is a unique story. We cannot generalize the disasters in categories because a lot of different settings, they play together and then there is a disaster. But still, this is the area where we need to focus a lot. For instance, if we see the last I just remind you, the last couple of disasters, these are permafrost-induced disasters. That is again thawing. And we know almost nothing from the ground what is happening with permafrost, how it is thawing. Then we have these changes in volume in future in these rivers, as highlighted by Professor Kulkarni. Up to 2050, we are expected to have more runoff. That means flood kind of situations mostly. More water issue. And after 2050, we will be having less and less water in these rivers in this region. That means drought kind of issue, or we can say less water. So we have to develop our own policies, understanding these changes in future, how we adapt these changes. And toward the last, there are some more challenges. When we are projecting these river runoffs, we have some methodological challenges. For instance, we are using very simplified models because we don't have enough data to use very complex models such as energy balance models. Most of the models don't have the sublimation included in that. So a lot of mass from ice and snow is going directly in the atmosphere through sublimation. So that is not included so far. And we don't have the permafrost included in the hydrological model. So how much contribution is coming from permafrost? At the moment, we don't have any idea. So I will stop here, but something comes and then I think I can put more details. Thank you.
Good evening, everybody. Firstly, I am very, very thankful for everybody for sticking around on day 2 and one of the last panels. So thank you so much for your patience. I would also like to thank University of Arctic, Lapland, and Professor Hussain for his continued support and the reason why I'm here on this panel. Actually, this is a very full circle moment for me. I used to intern at ORF and I was in charge. I was on the other side. I was in charge of organizing such events such as the Raisina Dialogue as well. So I'm very happy to be on the other side of the spectrum. And yes, my name is after Roshanara. So I am also happy to be sitting in Roshanara discussing about Arctic. Good evening, everybody. I have nothing new to add that my panelists have not said, but I think the only difference in what I want to add to the conversation that we are having today is about the approach and the perspective that we want to adopt while the interconnection between the Hindu Kush Himalayan region and the Arctic is seen. Firstly, we are going to look at the Arctic governance as well as the HKH governance. The Arctic governance, you have the Arctic Council, and we've spoken quite a lot about it across the 2 days as well. So similar sort of trajectory can also be adopted in Hindu Kush Himalayan region. But of course, we have contesting claims, especially when it comes to national security, when it comes to sovereignty. The third pole governance is also about HKH, how it is fragmented and how it is not unified yet. However, there are certain similarities, let alone if you just don't look at the geographical aspects of it. It is a lot about resource extraction under the guise of sustainability, and there has to be a unified approach towards sustainability for it to be secure in the future. There are, of course, colonial legacies and extractive governance, which Kanagavali was kind enough to also talk about in her presentation. Like I said, there's nothing new. I think the approach, however, of how the third world approaches can be used is how we can use local governance, we can use indigenous knowledge, traditional knowledge, as Professor Kamrul also said in his last session, to be incorporated within climate change and its realities that we see right now. Of course, these issues have had an element of internationalization, but without democratization, which is what I mean, like Arctic Circle happening in India is in fact an internationalization of the concept that we are seeing when we are discussing Arctic sitting in India, and we are discussing, of course, the Hindu Kush Himalayan region also sitting in Delhi. However, I think there needs to be an approach where we also have indigenous voices. And in the last event that I was fortunate enough to attend at ICIMOD, we had a lot of local knowledge sharing during that discussion, and I think that needs to be more incorporated in such discussions that we have even in New Delhi, or if we have it in Oslo as well. So that needs to be incorporated more in governance structures, more in climate justice, more in transitional justice. It is not just local knowledge or traditional knowledge that needs to be there, but also re-looking at how environmental law, international environment law in specific, needs to be re-looked at. Of course, India sitting in New Delhi, we cannot be remiss to not discuss India's role. I think India is in a very strategic position to play an active role in both the Hindu Kush Himalayan region, not just because of its own sovereignty and national security concerns, but also in the Arctic region because it plays an active scientific and environment approach in the Arctic. So India is strategically placed to bridge the divide between the North and the South, and can approach it with the climate justice or a climate perspective rather than an extractionist perspective or a more of a sustainable perspective. And I think India, with its knowledge, with its leadership, can bridge that gap between the North and the South. I think I just want to discuss TWAIL's framework for justice and solidarity. How do we actually get to that particular stage, whether India being a participant or other global South states being a participants? I know a lot of non-Arctic states are observer states, but how can they actually have a voice in the decision-making process is also factored in with what Dr. Tiwari was kind enough to point out, the science of teleconnections. If there is a transboundary impact happening in India, then India should have a chair at the table, a chair that has or will result in decisive action at the Arctic, and vice versa. I think that collaboration needs to be there. Of course, there also needs to be a language of resistance where it says that you have to figure out how local or traditional knowledge can be incorporated within the framework which approaches scientific knowledge or evidence-based knowledge. Why not also use evidence that has been prevailing for centuries? Another aspect is that we also need to figure out a framework for solidarity between the Hindu Kush Himalayan region and the Arctic region. It cannot be in isolation, it cannot be in silos. Most of what science, law, and policy domains work in, they operate in silos, they do not talk to each other. I think that is an approach that India definitely can further and can provide such platforms for furtherance. And another aspect that we can look at is relational governance, is basically looking at adoption of models such as the Arctic Circle, which is, yes, of course, a non-binding forum, but a forum nonetheless. At this point, we do not have a forum which talks about sustainability or climate change in the Hindu Kush Himalayan region. So it needs a cross collaboration or cross boundary collaboration. And yes, of course, it is hard. Yes, we are at war. Yes, I am not denying any of these actual realities, but it has to be from a climate justice perspective. And of course, I would like to further certain aspects of what I saw at ICIMOD and what I'm seeing at the Arctic Circle is the cross collaboration between Arctic as well as India, or Arctic and Hindu Kush Himalayan region. Of course, Antarctica has been claimed or termed as a global commons, which is not been done for either the Arctic or the Hindu Kush Himalayan regions. But does it not also have the same sort of effect or impact on climate systems? Even if we do declare climate system itself a global common, wouldn't that go way forward in order to approach it from a sustainability perspective? And of course, such platforms do provide platforms to certain global south scholars such as myself to be able to talk about these things in a not in a silos, but in a more cross-regional perspective. Of course, also the other thing that I have taken away from these 2 days, and of course the conference that I attended earlier, is its interdisciplinary nature. Often science talks in silos, policy talks in silos. Policy does not have anything to do with science, even though we call it evidence-based policy. We know that it needs more interdisciplinarity, it needs actuality, and as even Professor Azam was kind enough to mention, that there are real problems that we are facing, and policy alone, especially top-down policy, cannot be an approach alone to be able to get to that. And of course, the TWAIL approach is contextualizing a lot of the local knowledge, indigenous knowledge, and ensuring that these communities also have a say. So there is a horizontal application and horizontal collaboration in order to enforce policy or have impactful policy at the grassroots level. I think top-down approaches have worked only so far, and we've seen the impacts of it. We are looking at a more extraction-based situation. We are looking at certain countries being more protectionist in their approach rather than protection of the climate, right? So I think that would be a great approach going forward. So I think TWAIL gives TWAIL, which is the third world approaches to international law, will give that perspective and a critical analysis of the already existing policies and how we can implement them in order to support the climate system and local communities both in hand, and of course backed by evidence, which we've seen is not very promising. Thank you.
Okay, for the sake of time, I think we have only 10 minutes or close to 11 minutes. I skip the question sessions from internal panel, but I open the floor for questions from the audience. Please go ahead.
Thank you very much. In this session, as well as last 2 days discussion, we are really not really grasping what uncertain future we are going to have. We have very thinking about the rosy picture where somehow Arctic ice will be significantly reduced, we will have new land for exploitation, we will have new ocean for navigation, and we will have new resources and talking about how to exploit that. But just think that what climate change has put it into store. I will not go into all facets, just think one facet, which is the linkages between the uh, uh, this region and Arctic region. If suppose we all significant amount of glaciers are going to melt into the Arctic and that water dumped into the Arctic Ocean, it reduces its salinity, it means there will be collapse of Gulf Stream. And if Gulf Stream collapses, then how suddenly global climate will change, and whether then we will be in position to exploit anything Arctic or not, I don't know. So what I am saying to you is, are we analyzing this climate change in a realistic fashion, or just interpreting it as per our convenience?
I will just make I will make a comment, not the full answer that you can give. But sir, you mentioned about Gulf Stream, so that has started to happen. In fact, so Professor Ramstorff's studies have shown that already the Gulf Stream has started to slow down, and once it slows down, the climate what we are experiencing now is like a walk in park. That would be an entirely different scenario. Earth will go into different climate parameter. So yeah, now from there you can take.
Well, I don't have any kind of concrete answer, but what I want to say is that it's a planetary concern. Of course, new activities, human activities will take place wherever, a situation is allowing. But that is alarming, because we are talking about our planet, which is interconnected. So we don't have plan B, because we don't have planet B where we can go. So that's why we need to bring up these challenges. And then of course we are talking a lot about challenges, but then solutions are not that much spoken. And then even if solutions are spoken to some extent, they are not probably realistic to many extent. For example, we are talking about mitigation process, adaptation process, limiting the temperature rise below 1.5 or 1.2, 1.5 degree, or below 2 degrees. So that's what we are not actually experiencing as happening. So these are the challenges we are trying to bring in our discussions, of course, as usual in many discussions. There, of course, we were also bringing other aspects, how local knowledge, indigenous knowledge, communities are getting involved, how traditionally for thousands of years they have been surviving, and what knowledge we can gather from there. So yeah, but I don't have any concrete answer. I'm sorry about that. Next question probably. Yeah.
Do you mind if I just give you one answer? If we were not optimists, why would we be here, right? So there has to be a certain sense of delusion, I feel, or optimism that we have to operate on in terms of solutions and also. But then I think the certain forums can be disbanded.
Yeah, in continuation of that, we discuss and we say that similarities between the Arctic and the Third Pole and resource exploitation and governance and all that. But there is nothing in common. There's nothing in common in Himalayan, Hindu Kush mountains and the Arctic. For example, if you say the resource exploitation, the Arctic is full of resources, we all know. Himalayan resources are accepting the water resources and the tourism. There is no resource in the Himalaya. There are no mineral deposits. The entire Himalayas have been mapped geologically. We don't have anything excepting magnesite in Uttarakhand. So you can't put Arctic and the Himalayas at the same platter. Secondly, you talk of the Arctic Council and the Himalayan Council. You have to be realistic in the geopolitical situation. Now, if you have Himalayan Council on the same platter as you have the Arctic Council, and it was also brought this point in the session earlier, the 3 or the 4 nations, they don't see eye to eye with each other. So how do you run a council when here only the 7 members are in one stage and the other one is out of the 8 is the other part, and we are in a crisis. And here in the Himalayan Council, if you have, what sort of a governance you will have, right? So it is not practical. Let us not talk about things which are not doable. Then another question was asked about the parameters of measurement. Do you have any scientific parameters where you can quantify the impact. You're talking of the impact analysis. Do you have any measurement yardstick through which you can measure the parameters, the impact that are being caused?
At the present, we don't have, but we are working on it. We are trying to find out how the impact is not a unidimensional, so much multidimensional and multi-layered. And it's so difficult. Approximation is also difficult, to be honest. But again, I'm going to point, it's not impossible. There's always a start, initiation. And we have started from Japan, from Korea, we have started it. For example, biodiversity measurement and biodiversity impact. Latency impacts, latency measurement, not direct measurement, but latency measurement, which will give the approximation of what impact has caused climate. That kind of methodology we are exploring now. But yet, as you rightly mentioned, and I would like to add up one more point, difference, so much difference in Arctic and this region. We are, one factor, we are human, the habitat. So the impact is so huge for humans and biodiversity here, which is quite different than Arctic.
Yes.
And the assessment will be different. Climate security things will be different. Food security we are talking about, as I mentioned, so many different security layers are there, which we have to somehow understand and interpret and say to the policymakers and the international bodies, which are of course responsible for giving us finance and resources and making ourselves sustainable to get those resources. So yeah, we don't have that, but yeah, those differences are there, and then we have to very carefully understand our differences and work on those differences here to make realistic. Yeah, we have questions from.
Hi, Chris Rossi from the Arctic University of Norway. When mommy and daddy get divorced, they can't divide the baby. Water basins are known to be holistic, and they cannot be divided either. Unfortunately, the Indus Waters Treaty has cut up the baby into 6 parts, and because we're all equal here, 3 have gone to one country, 3 have gone to another country. But what I've been hearing and what I do believe in this conference is that there is some sort of holistic relationship between the Arctic and the Himalaya. And the North Pole and the Third Pole are connected. So my question to our Twale scholar and to our scientific scholars and to our scholars quoting poetry from 3,000 years ago is, from your various perspectives, in terms of creating a holistic solution to the problems that we've been facing for the last 2 days, how are you going to put this baby back together again?
Today's article has come into Indian Express, which is based upon my interview, which says that let me see the title of that article, which says that we need to renegotiate the Indus Treaty in a climate perspective. So I think that is something which has to be done. I have done extensive work on how Indus Treaty needs to be renegotiated in order to make it equitably available between both the nations.
I couldn't agree with you more. I'm sorry I didn't have that opportunity to present it to the foreign minister, whom I would have quoted his boss's words about blood and water in his reference to the Indus Waters Basin, and that wasn't in relationship to any sort of renegotiation. But again, to my colleagues here, if indeed there is a holism that we're talking about with regard to the connection between the Third Pole and the North Pole, how is it then that we can talk about security issues without properly considering the Indus Waters problem? And I haven't even mentioned the Brahmaputra and Bangladesh. Yes, I did, just now.
Yeah, you spoke about the baby, which is in the eastern side. There are, as you rightly mentioned, there are babies the western side. The baby, the eastern side never gets mentioned. There are 10 rivers, Brahmaputra, Irrawaddy, Mekong. So we don't talk about this. We don't get data. Data sharing doesn't happen. And the lower riparian states, if I would suggest that the BIMSTEC and ASEAN should come up together, and at least the lower riparian state should form something and push China to give data. So at least from this side, on the other side, we had the Indus Water Treaty functioning for 50 long years, despite 4 wars. And I think the water still flows. We don't have the mechanism to stop it yet at the moment. So I don't think that makes a practical sense. But in this side, we don't even get data here. So what do we do about that? It's just a counter question.
I'm sorry, we are actually already behind the schedule, but our panelists will be here. Maybe we will have coffee break now, so probably you can ask your question there. Just to conclude, I would say that, of course, when we are talking about, connecting Arctic with the third pole, it doesn't mean that we are only looking into commonalities. We are also looking into differences, and how from commonalities and also from differences we learn the region from each other, and how we could adapt that into our own context, because we all have our own dynamics. They're not similar, as you rightly said, but we are not talking about replicating Arctic governance model into the third pole model. It has its own reality that has to be adapted in accordance with its own reality. So with that word, I conclude this session, and thank you very much for your participation, questions, intervention. Thank you.